Oh, thank you, Stephen.
Thank all of you.
So there was really, to me, as soon as you agreed to do this, I thought there's really one question that I have to start with because this is the Turner Classic Movies Film Festival. The first SAG actor you ever directed was?
Joan Crawford.
How old were you?
22.
Sure. Tell, I think a lot of people know, but tell people what you directed her in.
It was a pilot, an NBC pilot called Night Gallery. It was a trilogy. There were two other directors, Joe Sargent and Boris Segal and myself. I did the center section. They're all three were written by Rod Serling, and of course we were all completely smitten and seduced by the Twilight Zone for so many seasons. So just to get to meet him, and the first person I actually directed, the first person I said action to, with a DGA card in my pocket, recently acquired, was Rod Serling. I directed the interstitials between each of the different paintings.
Oh, wow.
That was the
Didn't
first
know
time.
that. That's good stuff. So you were growing up, well, I got to ask you, Joan, was she Joan Crawford-esque?
She was more. She was not mommy dearest. Let's put it that way.
All right, good.
That was not my experience. She was kind and she was understanding, and she forgave my acne, and and the Clearasil that attempted to cover it up. She was a very, very. She was elegant. And she was selling Pepsi Cola left and right. She brought huge ice chests with Mountain Dew and Pepsis, and every single day gave it to the crew. And she said, if you don't belch after drinking, it's an insult. So she was having a good time.
You, I think I read, maybe I heard, but did you said that you were grateful to her because she treated you as if you knew what you were doing when you probably didn't.
I did not know what I was doing half the time because it was intimidating. I had never worked with a crew that size before. I've been making 16mm movies with friends at college, and I had made an unfinished 35mm film about a bicycle race, and then I had done Amblin in 35, which got me my contract at Universal. But that was a crew of 15 people, and I was surrounded by mostly men in 1968 in blazers with hats and ties. The gaffers, the electricians, the grips, they wore ties.
The
And some of
grips
them had
wore
hats.
ties?
Yes.
Wow.
It was a changing of the guard.
Yeah.
It was the evolution from Henry King and King Fedor to Martin Scorsese and Brian De Palma. That's what was happening.
So when you were growing up and you started to fall in love with the movies, what movies sort of framed your outlook on life? What did you go to again and again?
Well, what was available to me when I was very, very young, my parents were really truant officers about what I was allowed to see in a movie theater. They were really careful about that. And I was living in New Jersey in Haddonfield when The Searchers opened. And a couple of my friends had seen The Searchers. I was 10 years old. And they were saying it was great. And my parents said, no, we heard about it, and we heard it's not right for you're too young to see it. And I remember going into the cookie jar and getting 50 cents out of the cookie jar and dimes and walking 1.5 miles to the theater and paying and got my ticket, and I saw The Searchers. And never told my parents I had done that.
You turned out okay. So when you were doing Jaws, which was a film about a shark,
That one.
you met Henry Hathaway, who directed True Grit and Niagara and Nevada Smith, and he said to you, and I'm curious, it seems like this really stuck with you, never let them see your fear, your indecisiveness.
Right. He just said, let me give you a piece of advice before you go off to shoot your fish movie. He called it the fish movie. He said, I know there's a book out, and I know it's the fish book, and you're making the fish movie, but just remember one thing. He said, if you have any doubts about a shot or about something you want to tell the crew, and you don't quite know what to say, figure really fast what to say and say anything, because you cannot. The second you show weakness, they're going to swamp you. And I remember that, him saying that. You're just going to swamp you.
And that sense, that feeling that of some degree of panic, that's fueled you. You've used that to help you along during these productions.
I did, and it turned out that I showed a lot of insecurity. I showed a lot of doubt, and it was the ocean and the mechanical shark that swamped me, not anybody in the crew. They were great with me. They were great with me because I held the keys to their going home. I was the warden of Jaws, and when I finished the movie, they got to go home. And we had a 58-day schedule, and when we got to 72 days, they started being really nice to me. How can we help you? What more can we do to speed you along in finishing this? Because we were out on the water. We weren't like in a tank or in a lake. We were 12 miles past the Cape Pogue Lighthouse, past Menemsha on Martha's Vineyard, and we're at sea making this movie. And it was nothing like it has ever happened to me since.
So your sister has described you as a lonely kid. And I'm curious how that experience, some bullying, ultimately your parents divorcing when you were, 15, which is pretty close to the same age that...
Yeah, I was 17.
That's exactly how old I was when my parents divorced, split up. And it's not easy. Like you think, oh, he's fine. But your opinions of your parents has been so fully formed by then that it's kind of shocking to realize how fallible they are.
Yeah.
So how did that experience, and this is a very broad question, but how did that experience then, as we move forward, inform you as you set about the process of E.T.?
Well, I think when you go through something like that, and when any child goes through, an episode where your parents, who you trust and love unconditionally, but both of them come to you and my 3 younger sisters and just say, we are separating and we're going to be living not only in 2 different houses, but in 2 different states. The world collapses, the sky falls on your head. And it just, I'm sure those here that are children of a divorced household or themselves have been divorced, and they know the responsibility of how you have to super take care of your kids. It's something that never goes away, and it comes out in the wash, and certainly it's come out in a lot of my movies, in both indirectly, subconsciously, and in the latest film that I've just made comes out very directly.
I mean, E.T. is pretty direct. I mean, there's literally an absentee father throughout the film. So the concept for E.T., and clearly you'll correct me where I'm wrong. I mean, it's like 2 different ideas and some pressure to make a sequel to Close Encounters all coming together.
Well, what happened was I had been working on an actual literal script about my parents' separation and divorce. And I had been working on ideas about that and what it did to my sisters and myself. And this is back in 1976 when I was actually filming Close Encounters. And we got to the scene, we were shooting in Mobile, Alabama, and we got to the scene where the Puck, we call the little extraterrestrial Puck, where he comes down from the ship and he does the hand signs with Francois Truffaut. Come on. Can you believe that? I mean, one of the greatest honors of my life that he said yes to that. And we're shooting this scene, and I suddenly thought, wait a second, what if that little creature never went back to the ship? What if the creature was part of a foreign exchange program? Dreyfus goes, he stays, or she stays. And that was the feeling that I had. What if I turned my story about divorce into a story about children, a family trying to fill the great need and creating such responsibility? A divorce creates great responsibility, especially if you have siblings. We all take care of each other. And what if Elliot, or the kid I hadn't quite dreamed up his name yet, needed to, for the first time in his life, become responsible for a life form, to fill the gap in his heart?
So, but before we got to E.T., so this idea is germinating, and then you've gone from this successful, making these good made-for-TV movies, Duel in particular, and then you start making features, do Sugarland. Yeah, Duel's great.
Thank you.
Let me ask a quick Duel story, because it shows, I don't know, it runs counter to one of the narratives about the early great the filmmakers from your era, the Scorsese and Coppola and then Peter Bogdanovich, William Friedkin, Mike Nichols, all these great filmmakers, that you were they were more renegade and you were more of a studio guy, giving the studios what they want. But in Duel, and you're like what, 24 years old when you make Duel, something like that?
Yeah, I think 24.
Yeah. So you do the movie, and at the end of the movie is a movie about Dennis Weaver versus a truck.
Right.
And the truck goes over a cliff. And you got a lot of really cool shots about what happens to the truck. And the network says, "This is great, but this is America, and you're going to need to blow up the truck." Right. And what do you say?
Well, I didn't have any. I had no power except the power to say, action, cut, print, and set up the camera. That was it. When it came to releasing it on a major American network, they had a lot of clout, and I was helpless and felt hopeless when the directive got back to me through my producer George Eckstein that they were ordering me to go back out there at their expense, they'd pay for it, and blow up the truck, because you can't have a movie that ends with a truck dying a very slow, painful death, with the oil dripping down the steering wheel and the tires slowing down and the fan going, and they hated that. They wanted a pyrotechnic ending. And George Eckstein came to me and he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I don't want to shoot it, but what can I do?" And George said, "Well, I'm the producer. Let me go to work on ABC." And George delivered the good news the next day that they weren't going to make me reshoot the ending. He fought the fight, which is what's great about having a producer that has your back. Everybody has to know how important producers are in our lives, in our worlds, especially when we're just starting out. They are essential.
So well, I was about to say we finished Jaws and Close Encounters, because now obviously we're fused. So you finish Jaws and Close Encounters. This is you can't be more successful than as a film director than you were right then. And what do you make next?
Well, I sort of make the explosion from Duel that never got made for Duel. I made it instead for 1941, which was the next film. That was the that was the biggest detonation at that moment to my career. At that point.
So what was that moment like? What is that? You're on top of the world, and you experience very quickly how fast it can change in Hollywood. All of a sudden, it's not well received critically. It doesn't do the business that you expected, and all of a sudden you've made essentially a flop. It's not quite a flop, but what's that like?
It was a flop for at least 20 years. And then Universal said, "Well, we broke even in Japan," so that's something something good to say about it. It was, well, I enjoyed making the film. It was my longest schedule. Jaws was a very long schedule. It was scheduled for 58 days, and we shot 158 days, 100 days over schedule. But because of the two hits back to back, the studios just start writing checks. That's what happens. And they gave me a unlimited ceiling to make 1941. And it took me 178 days to shoot the picture, because I directed all the miniature work. That was first unit, not second unit photography. And that was a big mistake that I never should have made. But I had a great time making the film. And then when I showed the picture for the first time in Texas at my Good Luck Theater, where I showed Jaws at the Medallion Theater in Dallas, Texas, huge audience reaction to Jaws. Then I took Close Encounters there. It's my Good Luck Theater. Great reaction to Close Encounters. And then I took 1941 there, and you could hear a pin drop for 3/4 of the movie. It was the first comedy ever made without laughs.
So I'm always fascinated by the successful people who respond to failure, right, and public failure, right? So and you responded effectively with a film called Raiders of the Lost Ark, but that leads us then to E.T. And so these different ideas come together, and you sort of combine that little Close Encounters idea, resisting pressure, by the way, once again, resisting studio and money pressure to make Close Encounters 2. You said no. And you come up with this picture and this idea, your idea, E.T. How'd the script get made? I love this.
Well, I pretty much had worked out most of the story. And I needed a writer to write it with me, or hopefully write it was just based on the story. And I was shooting in Tunisia. We were shooting outside the Well of the Souls with Harrison, and Harrison's girlfriend, Melissa Matheson, was there on location. And she had done Black Stallion. She'd written Black Stallion, which I adored. She co-wrote that, which I adored that film. And I was just talking to her, and I told her my E.T. idea, the whole sort of story. And she said, well, I've retired from writing. I don't write anymore. I'm not interested in writing anymore. It's too hard. And she turned me down. And I went to Harrison, and I said, your girlfriend turned me down. She doesn't want to write my next movie or a movie in the future. And he said, well, let me talk to her. And he talked to her, and she came to me the next day. She says, okay, well, you got Harrison so excited about this. What is it that I missed? And I think I hadn't told the story to her very well, because I told her the story again, and she got really emotional hearing the story again, and she committed right in the middle of the Tunisian desert.
I've not heard of a process like the one you had with Melissa Matheson for writing the script. Describe that. How did you guys, the 5 days on and then 5 days together?
Well, what we did was I was editing with Mike Hahn. I was editing Raiders at our editing room at the Marina Del Rey, and she would come to the editing room, and she would wait until I gave Mike my input, then I'd go in another room or take a walk. She'd come over, we'd spend 2 hours a day for 5 days, and then she'd go off and write pages. And then she'd come back with those pages, and we'd do another 5 days. Because I had given her the narrative, but all the little moments, like E.T.'s ability to to teleport things, E.T.'s ability, with telekinesis, and all of those things, and also the idea that E.T. could feel your feelings. He could feel Elliot's feelings. That was something that happened in the spontaneity of working with a writer that was never in the story I presented to Melissa. There were so many details of character that Melissa just brought into my world from her world.
And at the end of this process of her going away and writing and then coming in and talking to you and then her going away and writing, she turns in a first draft of the screenplay.
She turns a first draft screenplay, and I was editing at my cutting room. I actually was having lunch with Kathy Kennedy, who was my associate producer on Raiders for the Lost Ark. And then I asked her, "Would you want a raise? You want to be a producer? How would you like to be a producer? Will you produce E.T.?
Did she turn you down, or did she
No,
accept it?
she didn't turn me down. No, she was. She said yes, and so I went over to her and I just said, "I think I've read the greatest first draft of my life. You have to read this." And she read it overnight, called me the next day and said, "I haven't read a lot of scripts. This is the best script I ever read." And that's all because of Melissa.
And that's pretty much the script you guys shot, right?
We shot the script. Shot in continuity.
So, yeah, now, why did you shoot E.T. In continuity? You hadn't done that in a movie before, right?
I had
Other than maybe TV.
Yeah, I had never really shot anything in continuity. Well, Sugarland, my first film, I shot in continuity. But I especially shot E.T. in continuity because of the ages of the characters, of Henry Thomas and Robert McNaughton and Drew Barrymore. Drew was like 6 at the time. And I wanted the actors, the kids, and Dee Wallace, who, the reason I cast Dee, she has the heart of a child. And she would allow her kids to call her Mary, not Mom. Because we called my mom, we all call my mom Lee. Her name was Leo. We didn't call her Mom, we called her Lee. And so in a sense, I cast the child in Dee Wallace to be part of so she wasn't really the adult. Peter Coyote was the adult, but Dee was part of the kid group. And I wanted the kids to know that what we were shooting now, today, is happening today. And the next 3 pages of the script will happen tomorrow. And what we just shot happened yesterday. And I wanted them to actually live a life of the story, which they did. So at the end of the movie, when they were, I don't want to give it away if nobody's seen E.T. here, but there's there's a lot of emotion at the end of the story and all of that. Well, they were there for every take because they were bidding farewell. They were saying goodbye for real because they knew soon they'd be going home.
So let's talk about that casting. You mentioned casting Dee. Why little Drew Barrymore for Gertie?
Well, I looked at a lot of young kids for Gertie and also for Elliot and for Michael. But when Drew came into my office, she took over the meeting by storm. She stormed the citadel of my office at MGM. She really did. And she said, I said, do you like acting? She said, I'm not an actor. I have a punk rock band. And she started telling me about this punk rock band that she had already formed, and she was going to play concerts with this. And I believed her. She had such an inner life. And I realized after a while that she didn't really have a punk rock band. But if she could believe she did, then she'd believe this little mechanical creature was a real extraterrestrial, and she was in my movie that day. She really was.
Jack Fisk, who was Sissy Spacek's husband.
He found Henry
found
for
Henry.
me, yes.
He's been in a movie called Raggedy Man, I think.
Yes.
So people can watch Henry's audition. It's on YouTube. Take us through that. What was that experience like?
Well, Mike Fenton and Jane Feinberg cast the movie with me, and so Mike was reading the sides with all the actors that came in, and when I met Henry at the suggestion of Jack Fisk, and he sent me a reel of just a couple of small scenes Henry was in Raggedy Man, and so I watched that, and I was impressed, but he was very introverted. And so I wanted him to come in, but he was having trouble with the dialogue. When he read the lines, it was a little bit, he wasn't really natural with the lines. So I asked him if they'd do an improv. And I set up a situation where he had a best friend who was a creature, didn't say it was an alien. I just said, you have a best friend, he's really little, and he's helpless, and he needs help. And these big bad guys from the government want to take him away. And Mike played the big bad guy from the government. And I just rolled the video camera, and the rest is on YouTube right now if you want to watch it.
It is. I mean, I don't even know if you have to be a parent. If you care at all about children, I mean, it's hard to watch in a sense. It's brilliant, but he is. I mean, he is really good. It's so powerful.
He's so good, and he's suffering the situation that I put him in because it wasn't a situation to him. He was defending this imaginary creature with his life. And at the end, you'll hear my voice at the end. I think I say, okay, kid, you got the part.
Yep, that's right.
It's on the tape.
That's it. And so you knew both with Drew, you have the meeting, and with Henry,
Right
the
away.
one out, you're like, that's
and
it.
also Robert McNaughton, I knew right away that Robert was the older brother, Michael. I knew right away. He was
Yeah,
fantastic.
Robert
he was
is
just
really
fantastic. Hi, Robert.
Mike is the unsung hero of that family. That's right. So,
Oh, you know about that, huh?
Yeah, so I wasn't going to mention Deborah Winger, but so in the rough cut, right? Deborah Winger?
Well, what happened was I needed a temp voice for ETs before Ben Burt brilliantly found, and if he were up here, he'd tell the whole story of this older woman he found when he was buying like aspirin at a drugstore, and he listened to her voice, and he said, there's the voice of ET. She was like she smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day, and she had cigarette voice, and it was not exactly an ad for the American Tobacco Company, but Ben found her. But before that, and Deborah and I were very close friends, and she was actually in the Halloween sequence. She's wearing a doggy mask, and she has a stethoscope around her neck, and she's limping. So when you watch the movie, you'll spot her through E.T.'s eye holes going past camera. And I asked Deborah just to do every single line of E.T.'s. So we just went into the makeup and hair trailer, and nobody else was in there. I had a Nagra, turned it on, and she just went through all the dialogue. And so the first, 50 people that saw my movie heard Deborah Winger as E.T.
So this, you is 1982. So by now you're a grown man. You're in your mid 30s, right? At this point, but you were a single guy, right? You were, and you were self-described a workaholic, right? I mean, what you did is you made movies, and that's what fueled you. That's where you felt best, right?
Don't all of us do that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and then you had you ever thought about having children?
No. I never thought about having kids because there was not any kind of an equation that made sense to me because I was going from movie to movie to movie, from script to script to script, and it never occurred to me until halfway through E.T. And
What do you mean?
well, I was a parent on that film. I was literally feeling like I was very protective of Henry and Mike and my whole cast, and especially Drew, who was only 6 years old. And I started thinking, well, maybe this could be my real life someday. It was the first time it ever occurred to me that maybe I could be a dad. That maybe, in a way, a director is a dad or a mom. And it started to really gnaw away at me. So when I left those kids, when we all went our separate ways and met again when we did the press for the film, although Drew stayed in my life for years and years and years, and I really felt that would be my next big production.
Did you have children? Do you have any children, Stephen?
I have 7 kids and 6 grandkids. So E.T. worked. E.T. works for me very well. It worked. And thank God for Kate Capshaw. Thank you, my wife, too.
Why did you retire after E.T.? You should have made another film. Look, I don't know whether I speak for everyone here, but I think I do. I know that this is a crowd of people that does not like remakes in general. You know, we're very protective. But man, if those of you who haven't seen the Steven Spielberg version of West Side Story are going to, I think you're going to reconsider that. And the great news is I've just learned how old your parents were when they passed, and it suggests that there are a lot of years left, and I suspect a lot of films left, and we're all grateful for that. So,
yeah, thank you.
Steven Spielberg,
Thank
everybody,
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Oh, and you know what? Wait. One thing I forgot, which I know film, in the list, I'm going to blame it on the teleprompter.
I can say that.
Yes. Let's go. Yeah, you do.
Carol Littleton, who cut E.T., my editor, my brilliant editor of E.T. is here.
Thank you, Carol.
Where's Carol?
Sorry.
Carol. I took you to the emergency room.
Steven Spielberg, everybody.
I love you,
Enjoy
Carol.
the 40th anniversary of E.T. Thank you.